So our third, so after two spectacular briefings, I don't really want to put too much pressure on you, but we're going to hear from Meredith Spector, who is going to speak to us about the Break Free from Plastic bill that's advised by Professor Hill. Please.
Thank you, Professor Cohen. Good morning. I'm Meredith Spector, and today I'll be presenting the program design for a key component of the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act of 2021. Thank you to my whole team for their tireless effort and advisor Adrian Hill. Today's presentation will cover the plastics problem, the legislative solution, program objectives and design, and strategic outcomes and how we'll achieve those results. So why do we need a break free from plastic? The simple answer is that the US creates the most plastic waste per capita of any country in the world. You might think, well, that's okay as long as I recycle everything that I use. Unfortunately, of that waste created, less than 10% is collected for domestic recycling. Another 50% is exported to countries where it's generally mismanaged. The purpose of the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act is to spotlight plastic pollution as a national crisis with negative environmental and health effects. Almost every stage of the plastic life cycle creates harmful greenhouse gas emissions, soil and water contamination, toxins that leach into the environment and bioaccumulate in wildlife, and air pollution from fossil fuel extraction that disproportionately harms low-income communities and communities of color. Current waste management procedures exacerbate this, since landfills and processing facilities are generally located in socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. This is an ambitious bill that will impact the daily lives of most Americans and residents in this country. It will impact the manufacture of some of our most ubiquitous goods and transform the way that consumers interact with recyclable and single-use materials. The Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act tackles these problems by mandating a program of extended producer responsibility. Extended producer responsibility, known as EPR, is a policy approach that takes the burden of end-of-life management off of consumers and places it back on producers, basically making the polluters pay. The four central objectives here can be viewed through the lenses of environmental, economic, and social goals. The first one is to prevent pollution and litter from plastic. The second is to fund and encourage sustainable design. The third is to empower local communities through outreach and education. And the fourth is to reduce negative health outcomes and environmental effects. So this sounds pretty great, right? As residents, we'd love to increase climate resilience and pay less for it. But how are we actually going to do this? The answer is through an EPR program with strong governance and partnerships with municipal and community stakeholders. The Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act explicitly mandates many requirements, which is a little unusual for this kind of legislation, which only highlights their importance to its implementation. And I'll just run through a couple of those. So some of the program essentials are to establish producer responsibility organizations as 501c3 nonprofits. They'll be organized according to product category determined by the Environmental Protection Agency and an advisory committee of diverse stakeholders. The program also requires comprehensive evaluation through rigorous reporting and auditing. And each producer responsibility organization will need to submit a product stewardship plan that will detail how the producer responsibility organization will carry out all of its tasks. Environmental justice is always also stipulated in the bill by ensuring rigorous monitoring of frontline communities and emphasizing equity in access and engagement of socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. Since the bill lays out these main requirements, our program design focuses on the discretionary elements left open for interpretation. These discretionary elements can be framed as questions. The first one we want to address is, what will be the extent of governance and oversight? This is very important because these are the activities that will create the program and let it exist. We will create a new division of the EPA called the Plastic Pollution Program. This is needed because of the broad scope of how many collaborating entities will be affected. The Plastic Pollution Program will be originally housed under the EPA Office of Resources Conservation and Recovery, but in the longer term will develop into its own branch. We'll also create a central agency packaging registry, which will quantify and standardize data of covered products and producers. No such repository yet exists in the United States, but in other countries has been seen as vital to the success of such a program because, as we know, what gets measured gets done. Producer responsibility organizations will be funded by membership fees from producers. So how will these be assessed and what will they cover? Again, the scope here is very large. So the fees will be graduated based on the type of material produced and the amount produced annually. This sounds like it could get pretty expensive. And the answer is yes, that's right, but we're providing maximum coverage here. So the membership fees will cover administrative costs like daily operations and staffing, waste management, collection, and cleanup, including improving existing technology and infrastructure, and grants for research and development, encouraging design for the environment, which encourages producers to think at the beginning of their process what the impacts might be all along the life cycle. Finally, there's a spectrum of how EPR can be enacted, specifically for waste management. The extremes on this spectrum are full or partial opt-in, which will define the interaction between private and public entities. Through benchmarking, we've decided that the best version for the United States is municipal reimbursement with full regional opt-in. This means while the producer responsibility organizations are financially responsible, they will rely on municipalities to continue to use their existing infrastructure to carry out their regionally diverse waste management needs. Once again, putting this financial burden on the producers will incentivize those producers to start designing out waste for a less costly end-of-life waste management. So at the beginning, I framed the plastics problem through three lenses: economic, social, and environmental. We'll also use these lenses to assess the program's success. A successful economic outcome will address plastic waste management market failure and incentivize less production in the first place. A successful social outcome will ensure access and convenience for underserved communities and include diverse stakeholder voices in implementation strategies. A successful environmental outcome will standardize targets for decreasing pollution and litter and boost compliance and enforcement. Success of the EPR program will require harmonious intersection of those three pillars. When plastic cannot be eliminated, advancing recycling technology will keep useful resources out of the landfill and reduce the need for new extraction. Economic incentives or penalties will help ensure reaching the environmental goals and ultimately lead to the social goals of reducing health effects and making recycling and composting convenient and preferred and equitable. As the US rebuilds from ongoing health, economic, and climate crises, we can do better to implement extended producer responsibility in order to systemically reform the negative impacts of plastic production, and those most vulnerable to it. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
I had a question about recycling in municipalities. So I understand that the idea is that basically these producer responsibility organizations are going to pay like municipalities to continue doing waste collection. I understand the bill really wants to encourage more recycling, but a lot of times municipalities don't recycle because it's expensive to implement, even though it's feasible. And so I'm wondering, like, if these organizations, which are basically representing companies, and they want to keep their costs low, they might actually be tempted to like recycle less because that's actually the cheaper option. So what is the oversight to actually encourage more recycling?
Well, they won't be allowed to recycle less because there are specific performance targets implicit in the bill. So that's why there's maximum membership fee for municipal reimbursement. That pressure should be off of the municipalities because they won't be paying for it. And also, it's not just about recycling and composting. There's really a big part of this bill that is aimed at reducing waste in the first place.
Meredith, thank you for the presentation. I have a question with respect to your breakdown of membership fees. So there was administrative costs and then research and grants. And my question is, of a certain budget, is there a specific percentage that goes to, let's say, administrative costs, which, does the bill explicitly say no more than, let's say, 5% or 10% goes to administrative costs, or is that decided along the way?
So that is not specifically stated, which is why it's one of the discretionary elements we wanted to discuss. And we're continuing to discuss that, and we'll get into it further in the budget and implementation.
Great presentation. Thanks. I just have a question about your words. I have a question about a previous presentation that your group gave and how it relates to the new EPA office that you guys are hoping to establish. In, I think, your political context presentation, you guys talked about how a lot of independent and private actors, such as Waste Management or other companies responsible for recycling, see a lot of risk with the concept of EPR. And I was wondering how you guys anticipate the partnership between this new office and your opposition and what that might look like, and also the challenges that might create downstream in establishing EPR.
The EPA, that's a great question. The EPA is really in the picture for governance and oversight because we're talking about so many companies here. Like if you're talking about all the covered plastic products, that could be, I mean, there are like possibly hundreds of thousands of companies in the US, so how many producer responsibility organizations will there be? That's exactly why we chose this municipal reimbursement structure, because, can you restate the first part of your question? Sorry.
Yeah, it got really wordy really fast, but the gist of it is, how do you see the new office that you guys plan on implementing in the EPA engaging with opposition in the waste management industry?
Okay, got it. So again, what really is helping ameliorate some of those challenges is the fact that there's still this municipal waste management inclusion, because when you do full opt-in, which would be the producer responsibility organizations creating their own outside waste management, that leads to monopolies and local local facilities losing out. This keeps that competition, and it also encourages community engagement. Does that answer your question?
Another excellent presentation.